Linux powers Android, most of the internet, every supercomputer on Earth, and probably the website you're watching this on. Yet people still say things like Linux is basically Unix. Is that actually true? Did Linux copy Unix? Is Unix still around? And if Linux won, why do companies still pay thousands of dollars for Unix licenses? Let's settle one of the biggest misconceptions in computing. It all starts in 1969. Back then, computers were gigantic, expensive, and unbelievably incompatible. Buying software for one machine usually meant buying another computer to run it. Every manufacturer had its own operating system, its own rules, and its own headaches. Then, a small team at Bell Labs had a radical idea. Instead of building software for one computer, why not build an operating system that could move between different machines? That project became Unix, and it quietly changed computing forever. Unix wasn't just another operating system. It introduced ideas we still use every day: the hierarchical file system, user permissions, the command line. Small programs that each do one thing really well, then work together. Think of Unix as the blueprint that inspired almost every modern operating system. If you've ever opened Terminal on a Mac, connected to a Linux server, or typed commands like ls, cd, or grep, you're seeing Unix's influence. Now, fast forward 22 years. It's 1991. A Finnish computer science student named Linus Torvalds is using a teaching operating system called Minix. It works, but it has one problem. He can't change it the way he wants. So instead of complaining on the internet, he builds his own operating system from scratch. He calls it Linux. Then he posts a message online that basically says, "I'm building a free operating system. It's just a hobby. Probably won't be anything big." That may be the greatest understatement in tech history. Today, Linux powers cloud platforms, smartphones, stock exchanges, space missions, smart TVs, and virtually the entire internet. Not bad for a hobby project. Now here's where people get confused. Linux was inspired by Unix. It behaves like Unix. Many of the commands are the same. The overall philosophy is almost identical. But Linux does not contain Unix's original source code. Think of it like this. Imagine someone tastes Coca-Cola, goes home, then spends years creating a drink that tastes remarkably similar without ever seeing Coca-Cola's secret recipe. That's Linux. Same experience, different recipe. And that difference changed everything. Because Unix is proprietary, Linux is open source. Those two words shaped the future of computing. With proprietary software, the company owns everything. You pay for a license, you don't get to see the source code. You can't modify it. You simply use whatever the vendor gives you. Open source flips that idea upside down. Anyone can inspect the code, anyone can improve it, anyone can fix bugs, and anyone can create their own version. Thousands of developers around the world contribute to Linux every single day. The result? Linux evolves incredibly fast. New hardware support, security patches, performance improvements. They're constantly arriving from companies like Google, Intel, Red Hat, Samsung, and thousands of independent developers. No single company owns Linux. Instead, an entire global community helps build it. That's one of Linux's greatest superpowers. Before we go any further, we need to answer one important question. If Linux isn't Unix, why do they feel almost identical? Open a Linux terminal and type ls to list files. Now do the same on a Unix machine. Same command. Try cd to change directories. Same command. Search for text with grep. Again, same command. So what's going on? The answer is something called POSIX. Think of POSIX as a rulebook. It doesn't tell developers how to build an operating system. It simply defines how a Unix-like operating system should behave. It's like the rules of football. Every league may have different teams, different stadiums, and different coaches, but everyone agrees on the same basic rules. Linux follows those rules. Unix helped write them. That's why moving from Linux to Unix feels surprisingly familiar. Now let's look under the hood. Every operating system has one component that's doing almost all of the heavy lifting. It's called the kernel. If the operating system were a city, the kernel would be traffic control. Every request, opening a file, launching an app, connecting to Wi-Fi, talking to your graphics card, passes through it. Without the kernel, your software has no idea how to communicate with your hardware. Unix has its own proprietary kernels. Linux has the Linux kernel, and that's a huge distinction. The Linux kernel is completely open source. Thousands of developers around the world contribute to it every year. Google contributes, Intel contributes, AMD contributes, Samsung contributes. Even companies that compete with each other work together on Linux. That's because they all depend on it. Imagine Toyota, Ford, Tesla, and BMW, all helping improve the same engine. Sounds impossible. In the Linux world, it's normal. Now let's talk about where these operating systems actually live. Because chances are, you're using Linux right now. Your Android phone? Linux. Your smart TV? Probably Linux. Your Wi-Fi router? Very likely Linux. The cloud services behind Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, ChatGPT, and millions of websites. Mostly Linux. In fact, Linux powers the overwhelming majority of the world's web servers. It also runs every one of the top 500 supercomputers on the planet. From smartphones in your pocket to spacecraft millions of kilometers away. Linux is everywhere. Unix, on the other hand, took a different path. Instead of spreading everywhere, it became highly specialized. Systems like Oracle Solaris, IBM AIX, and HP UX are built for organizations where reliability matters more than flexibility. Think banks processing billions of dollars, government agencies, research laboratories, large enterprise data centers. These systems are incredibly stable, but stability comes at a price, literally. A commercial Unix license can cost thousands of dollars per server before you even think about support contracts. Linux? Most distributions cost exactly nothing. You can download Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Linux Mint, or dozens of others for free. No license fees, no activation keys, no expiration dates. Of course, companies like Red Hat sell enterprise support for businesses that need guaranteed assistance. But the operating system itself remains open source, and that's one of the biggest reasons Linux exploded across the server industry. When businesses realized they could get enterprise-grade performance without paying enterprise licensing fees, the choice became pretty obvious. So far, Linux has been looking pretty unbeatable. It's free, it's flexible, it runs almost everywhere. So, is Unix obsolete? Not quite. Unix and Linux organize files almost exactly the same way. Everything starts from a single root directory, represented by a /. From there, the operating system branches into folders like /home, /usr, /etc, and /var. If you've learned your way around one, you'll feel right at home in the other. But underneath that familiar structure, they begin to diverge. Traditional Unix systems often use file systems designed specifically for their own hardware and operating systems. Linux takes a different approach. It supports a huge variety of file systems, including ext4, XFS, BTRFS, and many others. Why does that matter? Because flexibility wins. Linux can power a tiny Raspberry Pi with a memory card, a gaming PC with an SSD, or a warehouse full of enterprise servers. Same operating system, completely different hardware. And speaking of hardware, this is another area where Linux completely changed the game. Many commercial Unix systems were built for one manufacturer's computers. For example, Solaris was closely tied to SPARC processors. HP UX was designed for HP hardware. Moving to a different platform often meant an expensive migration project. Linux doesn't really care. Intel, AMD, ARM, PowerPC, RISC-V. If somebody builds interesting hardware, someone in the community will probably make Linux run on it. That's why Linux powers everything from smartwatches to Mars rovers. It simply adapts. Now let's talk security. People often ask, which one is more secure? The honest answer is, both can be extremely secure. The difference isn't security itself, it's how updates happen. With traditional Unix, updates come from the vendor. If a vulnerability is discovered, you wait for Oracle, IBM, or another vendor to develop, test, and release a patch. With Linux, thousands of developers and security researchers are constantly inspecting the code. The moment someone finds a vulnerability, the entire community gets to work. The result is often much faster fixes. It's basically the difference between having one security guard or an entire neighborhood watching the same house. Of course, open source doesn't automatically mean perfect. Bugs still happen. Security flaws still exist. But when millions of eyes can inspect the code, problems tend to get spotted a lot faster. Now let's talk support. This is where many businesses still choose Unix. If your company's banking system crashes at 3 o'clock in the morning, you probably don't want to ask strangers on Reddit for help. You want to call the company that built the operating system. Commercial Unix gives you exactly that. Dedicated enterprise support, service agreements, engineers on call. Linux can offer professional support too. Companies like Red Hat and Canonical provide enterprise-grade support contracts. But if you're running Ubuntu at home, your first support technician is probably Google. Fortunately, the Linux community is one of the largest and most helpful in technology. Whether it's Stack Overflow, official documentation, forums, or YouTube, someone has almost certainly solved the problem you're facing. So after all that, let's settle the debate. Unix came first. It introduced many of the ideas that shaped modern operating systems. Linux came later. It adopted those ideas, rebuilt everything from scratch, opened the source code, and scaled them to the entire world. Think of Unix as the architect. Linux is the city that grew from the blueprint. Without Unix, Linux probably wouldn't exist. But without Linux, modern computing would look completely different. So which one should you learn if you're getting into software development, cybersecurity, cloud computing, DevOps, or system administration? Start with Linux, not because Unix isn't important, but because Linux is the operating system you'll encounter almost everywhere. Every command you learn, every shell script you write, every server you configure is building a skill that's valuable across the entire tech industry. And here's the best part. You don't need expensive hardware, you don't need a commercial license, you don't even need a second computer. Download a beginner-friendly distribution like Ubuntu or Linux Mint, open the terminal, and start experimenting. Because the fastest way to understand Linux is to use Linux, and who knows, the next operating system that changes the world might start as someone else's little hobby project, or maybe yours. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the world of computer technology. Until next time, keep exploring, because the more you understand your computer, the more powerful it becomes.